Hello. Welcome back to YouTube, or welcome back to my stream on YouTube. Gonna continue the series on PowerApps that we started. This is gonna be the second video in the series. The first video, in case you missed it, you can find it in the videos tab on my channel. I don't know why I'm explaining to you guys how to use YouTube. If you found this video, you obviously know how to use YouTube. Go find the first video. It covers getting a PowerApps environment and the basics of controls and what they are, what controls are available to you in PowerApps through the basic developer license, and just a sort of overview of like how they worked, kind of. But yeah, I thought it came out pretty well. One thing I neglected to mention is there's some background music in the video. If you enjoyed it, it's like freeware music created by another YouTuber. His name is Total Eclipse. He creates content for Satisfactory, I think mostly, and also makes music, and so it's pretty chill freeware music, so I got it playing in the background. Hope you like it. Anyway, getting back to the video. This video is going to be discussing the topic of variables, collections, and galleries, and then ultimately data sources, and what all those things are. Again, I'm kind of gearing these videos around the idea that you have any varying degree of familiarity with both PowerApps and with development itself. So if you have no idea what a variable is, you're in the right place. If you have been a dev for 5 years, probably don't want to be here. If you have been a dev for 20 years, you might be in the right place. I don't know. But anyway, that is to say that we're just going to talk about PowerApps and we're going to talk about development. So what is a variable? A variable is a container for information, and in the context of PowerApps and in the context of most languages, it's a typed container for information. And I guess I should probably sit down and use our PowerApp here. So a variable is a typed container for information. So, and what do I mean by like a container for information? The idea, and we touched on this in the first video, that there are there are literal strings. You can hard code a label to be a literal string, or you could, for example, assign a string into a variable, and then change the contents of that variable over time, and effectively change what's displayed to the user in the string over time, and that that's that's what a variable would be used for. And there are different types. I just used the example of a string, but there are different types of containers for information. The another type would be a number, a Boolean value, a true or a false value, a choice value, an enumeration value that you're pulling in from Dataverse would be another type. Excuse me. So there are tons of different not tons, but there are, different types of variables, and, they have different expected behaviors and outcomes when you use them in certain scenarios. So understanding both, what a variable is and that it can have a type is going to give you a leg up, and then it holds data. So I guess these should probably be reversed, but we'll talk about local versus global scope really quick, and then how to actually create a variable. The concept of local scope means a variable exists only within this screen in PowerApps. So within demo, we only have one screen in this app, so demo screen controls, would be the scope of the screen that we're in right now, and only variables defined within update context on this screen would be available at this time. We could, for example, have a second screen called demo screen 2, and we could have a context variable in demo screen 2 that's named exactly the same thing as the context variable in demo screen, but they could have different values, or they could have the same value, and when we're accessing that value, we're pulling the version from that screen. And for example, if we didn't have that value on screen 2 and we tried to access it, it wouldn't be there. And we would probably get an error. So update context and set. Let's actually try. Let's do some experiments and try that out. So let's make a second screen and let's learn about what variables are. Let's pull this up and give ourselves a button. Oh, and let's check off when we talked about variables. And also local versus global scope, but we didn't quite talk about it yet. So inside this button, oh, Red Honda Check is here. Hey. Oh, you surprised me. I didn't expect to see chat. Hey. Okay, so when we select our button, we talked about properties in the first video. We talked about the concept of properties, and we talked about a few properties, and we sort of touched on how to put in a property. But the property that we're going to speak specifically about right now is the onSelect. And onSelect is a special property, and that you can type in multi-line formulas into that. You can actually type a multi-line formula, a calculated formula, I think it's called. I forget exactly what it's called. I think it's called a calculated formula. Into the onSelect property of the button. And what that means is you can call functions and use semicolons to represent new lines and actually write logic inside of buttons. They're pseudo functions essentially. PowerApps doesn't quite give you the ability to write functions out of the box yet, but they're providing things that are close to it. And it's not that bad once you get the hang of it. So once you understand. So we were talking about the idea of local versus global scope. And so the way you create a variable in the local scope is with update context. And the update context function is addressing a local table inside of the screen space itself. So to do that, you want to use your open parentheses and then use your curly brace, which is what you always use to address the inside of records inside of a table. So in here, we're just going to do a test. We're going to do context test, and we'll just set this to true. We'll set this to a string. We'll set this to hello world. Right, and we'll close that. and we'll push our button, and what happened? Nothing happened, of course, because we haven't actually, behind the scenes something happened, but visually what happened, who knows? So let's grab a label and drop it in over here, and then let's use our variable. Let's skip to how to reference a variable in control, and let's use our variable here. In the context, we didn't use. Speaking of skipping naming conventions, we skipped naming conventions. And this is a perfect example of why you want to use naming conventions, because I was like, hey, what did I just name that thing? Well, you named it context test, but that's not really a great local variable name, is it? Because what we really want to do is call this local context test, because now when I come in here and I'm like, hey, what did I name that variable? I can go local context test, and now the IntelliSense is like, hey, dummy, here's your variable, of course. So now when we hit our button, we get hello world, because that's the content of this variable, and we can confirm that by double clicking on this variable, and we can see our code assistant at the bottom here. This variable content at display is showing us the value inside of context test is set to hello world, and it's also showing us our type, our data type, which is set to text, which is our typed container, remember. So we can see that it's a text, and we can see that it has hello world. But that's a context variable. So on this screen, when I go here and I want to set this to loc context test, it doesn't pop up in IntelliSense, and we've got an error here. It's not recognized. And that's because our variable is defined in local scope. And that's the difference between screen scope and global scope. So let's go back into the code for our button, and let's add another variable. And let's add a global variable this time, and to create a global variable, use a different function, because let's make this confusing for everybody. Why not? When you're creating global variables, they're created at the top level, so they don't exist in a table. They just get set with a function called conveniently set. And the PowerApps coding standards white paper recommends that the 3-letter prefix, remember we talked about prefixes for names, the prefix of names of controls. Well, you also want to make sure you name your variables. And your naming convention for your variable is very, very important, because the names of variables are just like the names of the controls. It's the same thing. They carry the same weight, they're of the same importance. The white paper recommends GBL as the 3-letter prefix. We use a exclamation point, because why not? And oh no, what have I done wrong? I tried to use the semicolon. No, we're not addressing the table either. That's not, it's also different. Use a comma. Why is it different? Talk to Microsoft. But these are the 2 different ways that you set a variable. And a good maybe point of emphasis right now that we might want to hit is commenting. And the commenting convention in PowerApps is the same as C# or C++ or C, if you're familiar with those languages, and also many other JavaScript and many other languages. It's the // or you can start a block comment with the slash asterisk and then asterisk slash can close the block comments and single line comment. So this is your local variable setting, and here is your global variable setting. We'll drag that out, and in PowerApps it offers you the ability to format your formula or remove the formatting on your formula, and depending on your style and depending on what you're writing, you may or may not want to not click this format text button, depending on the formula and what you're currently writing. You may want to save it. You may not want to click it till the end, or you may not want to click it at all. But one thing that's interesting to know about the format text button is that it's only clickable if your formula has correct syntax. So if your formula is incorrect in any way, this format text button isn't going to do anything, or will even be grayed out, possibly, I think. So keep that in mind. Like, there we go. If I remove that comma there, format text is now grayed out, as well as remove formatting, because it has no idea how to format something that it doesn't understand the syntax of. I find single line formatting can be pretty handy when you're looking at like data assignments and stuff like that. Whereas if you hit format text on a big like blob of data assignments, PowerApps is going to want to conveniently put everything on its own line for you, because that looks nice, neat, and pretty. But really what it does is it just makes everything 3 times to 2 times longer than it has to be, kind of, because it also puts all data sources on its own line and everything too. So it gets pretty lengthy. If your formulas are short, it makes everything look really pretty. If you have really big blocky formulas, you may want to do your own formatting. Keep that in mind. Give me 1 second. Okay, so we've seen how to set this variable, and we've seen that we can't access the other variable on this formula on the screen. So now can we access our global? Oh yeah, we can. There it is, because we have global scope on this, across screens. So that's the difference between local versus global scope. And again, just looking at the code here, this is the difference between the ideas between local variable setting and global variable setting. With update context and with set, and the difference between the local scope being a table and set not being a table, just being an object. We briefly discussed naming conventions again, but I'll check this one off and then I'll hit on the white paper. Here we go. The PowerApps Canvas Apps Coding Standards and Guidelines paper was created by the creators, along with help from MVPs and other ISVs and internal product teams and developers from Microsoft, came together to create this white paper to help as they explain. Once you understand the basic concepts, this paper will help you get to the next level. The standards and guidelines are targeted at the enterprise application maker, who is responsible for designing, building, testing, deploying, and maintaining PowerApps in a small business, corporate, or government environment. We feel that adherence to these guidelines will help developers in these areas. Simplicity, readability, supportability, ease of deployment and administration, performance, accessibility. As we mentioned in the white paper, these coding standards and guidelines are flexible and serve as a starting point for organizations to develop their own standards. This white paper is intended to be a living document as Microsoft Power Platform capabilities and industry standards change, so will the paper, so on and so forth. The idea inside the paper is it specifically addresses the idea of code naming conventions. So this is where it specifically addresses the idea of local versus global prefix, and the idea of using camel casing, which is where you begin your variable with lowercase character, and then after the prefix, you have an uppercase character, and then each word is uppercase. And your variable can be very long if you need it to be. Specifically in the case of controls, sometimes what I'll like to do is, especially if you have duplicated types of controls across two screens, or even within the same screen, or across multiple components that do similar things but are just like kind of children components, not really like, what I mean. We'll get there maybe, and it'll make more sense, but essentially you have a bunch of controls that essentially should have exactly the same name, but the quagmire here is every control name in PowerApps must be unique, even if it's not on the same screen. So to combat this travesty, and that goes as well for components too. So what you do to combat this is generally use your prefix, then name the control, and then use the name of the screen like loosely, with abbreviations after the name of the control again, so that gives it a secondary level of context. So if it's like in a unique type of gallery, use that unique gallery indicator in the variable name or something like that. And this goes on to give you examples of what what's a good variable name versus what's a bad variable name. And then it's going on to talk about collections, which is a bit of a spoiler. We haven't really talked about collections yet. So how to reference a variable and a control. I think I kind of just did that, but let's definitely talk about that again. The idea that you've named a variable, and you name that whatever you name. Whatever is on the left side of, let me format this again so it's a little bit cleaner. Whatever is on the left side in terms of update context of the colon is the name. And if there were two variables here, like let's say another variable, and let's format this again, and it'll put it on another line for us. We can see that this is working. Hey, again, perfect. So everything to the left of this colon, is the name. And everything to the right of the colon is the value, up into the tilde comma. Pretty straightforward, right? You close your table, and then you close your function, and then you give it a semicolon. And then in terms of the set, everything pre-comma, it's the same thing, but you're just using comma instead. So everything pre-comma is like this. The only difference here is that I don't actually know if this works. Can I just set another variable? I've literally never tried this. Doesn't seem to work. Yeah, unsurprisingly. that doesn't work. But we can set another variable, just like this. Put our trailing semicolon, format our text again, like that, and we get our another variable. Now, it does get a little bit deeper than that with sets, but I think for now, we're going to leave it there. But you can actually create tables within your set as well. You can create a non-mutable table within a set by nesting the table within the set. And I'll leave that up to exercise for the viewer to try on your own. But we'll cover that in a future video. So the next thing is, what is a collection? I'm going to take a short break and we'll cover collections in a couple minutes. Okay, I'm back. The question is, what is a collection? So, if I haven't done a great job of writing, but I did actually do a lot of examples here. So, if a variable is a typed container for information, then a collection is, believe it or not, it's hard to define collection without using the word collection, because a collection is a collection of variables, basically, of variables of information. It's basically basically what it amounts to. Collections aren't really scary. They're just a whole bunch of variables. The only difference is again, you address them in a completely different way with a different set of functions, and you can operate and view them in completely different ways as well. So, knowing that, I guess collections really just aren't scary at all. I mean, I guess you kind of already know what a collection is, so boom, I guess let's check that off. So the idea of these functions, clear, collect, and clear collect, and those are going to be kind of like our, it's kind of like our set, but there really aren't analogies here, so we'll just toss in another button. Let's give this first of all, let's give this a name. The structure of my application, by the way, we're going to do a video or stream very soon. If not, I'm about to have a sidetrack right now on structure of application and structure of screens, and another concept that I haven't even touched on yet, which is containers, which is how you're going to structure your application to begin with, how you're going to structure your controls. The idea of that is going to come in a future video. So this is variables demo. And then this button over here is button collections demo. Here is where we're going to talk about collections. And one thing I want to do is I just want to open up the PowerApps documentation. And by the way, go to the PowerApps documentation right now as you're watching with me, as you're following along here. And if you haven't already, just start reading like crazy. Pause the video and then just like start reading stuff. It's really awesome. Resource for things, and also make sure you make sure you drop it into your bookmarks and make it something that you go to frequently. But also, the way I brought that up so quickly, in case you're curious, is I just highlighted anything. Well, I mean, actually, I think you actually just literally anywhere. Yeah, okay, literally anywhere inside PowerApps, you just hit F1, and it just brings up the docs. And then you can type in any function. Like I just typed in collect because I want to talk about the collect function. So I type in collect and it shows me collect, clear, and clear collect, which isn't the order that I put them in, but that's okay. So I'll hit that again, and then that brings up the help file. So let's see what Microsoft actually, hey kitty, we'll see what Microsoft actually says about collections. Collections are a special kind of data source. They're local to the app and not backed by a connection to a service in the cloud. Well, they're already skipping ahead. We're talking about local data, but they're making a distinction of it here in the documentation as well, actually, which is quite good on their part. I was going to use this as a segue, and we are still going to. But they operate like any other data source, with a few exceptions. Collections can be created dynamically with the collect function, and they can be modified at any time using the collect function. So let's look at that right now. Oh, my cat struggles to figure out what to do with herself. Okay. We're going to collect on something. First you need a collection and then an item. So following our naming convention, we call collections with the three-letter prefix COL, which makes it easier to address collections. And we can name our collection I don't I don't know. So we'll call it kitty stuff. This is all the stuff that Kitty does. And we'll just hit a comma there, and then we need to add an item. So again, if you remember when we were talking about the update context function, and we talked about the idea of addressing a table instead of a variable directly, well, a collection is a collection of tables. Excuse me, is a collection of records. It's a table of records. And right now we're defining a record in that table, with call kitty stuff being the table, and this being the first record of the table. And you can define the variable name. So when you're inside, a collection, you don't need to follow the same GBL or local convention because you're already inside the scope of this collection, and the only way to access this variable is to be within this collection. So what you can do is you can either follow, you can diverge here. Either you can begin your you can begin this variable with either a lowercase letter or with an uppercase character. It's really up to you, and that's really the only level of divergence that you can do. But what you can also do is, and this is +1 in favor of beginning with an uppercase character, is that your tables in your data source will also be uppercase characters, first of all. And you may want to build a collection with column names that mirror a data source. And that may be because of an application design implication. So to do that, you want to have the ability to address something with a space in it. So to do that, you can do that with single quotes, like so. And you can you can say like her full name like that, and we can say Delilah, and that would be a way to address a column name that has a space in it. If it doesn't have a space in it, and you just need and you just want to, if it's just like food, and the answer is probably chicken, then you don't need to put any sort of special characters in there. I believe you can, and it's not going to throw any errors. If you want to do that for style and consistency, go right ahead. There's really no reason why you can't. Now, see, the idea with this is we've created actually we should rename this. Call kitties, call cats, and we'll do like that. So that's my cat right there, and this will be a better representation of what a data set is. And then we'll close that record, and we can hit a comma here, and now we can give it we can't give it anything because we're using the collect function. So let's actually let's use this as a way to display how this works in use galleries too. So let's get a gallery out. I just selected a vertical gallery here. And for this, I haven't really shown you guys how to use galleries at all, but you can come in on the gallery and hit this layout, raise that up. just make this a little bigger, even though there's only going to be one thing in the collection. For now, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to hit title and subtitle just so we get two labels there. You can also hit blank. But we can talk about what a gallery is. A gallery is a representation of a visual representation of a collection. So a gallery will always have a property called items. And that items can be set to a collection. So they come with to a table. A table is a collection. Remember, those are synonymous. The default custom gallery sample, you can see it has a sample heading. These are the columns: sample heading, sample image, sample text, so on and so forth. I'm only using 2 of these, but because I pulled this back, but if I had like image and title, this would be using the sample image now. You can see that. But we only want title and subtitle because our collection only has two columns in it. So we called our collection call cats. So we're going to set this to be call cats, and we're going to set this to be food, and this to be full name. It already was. But I actually like it the other way around. So let's swap those. And all I was doing there was just clicking on these labels, even though they're invisible, and just setting their text property to be, oh goodness, I almost skipped a whole rabbit hole here. I didn't mention the concept of how if a gallery is a way of displaying a collection, and a collection could be any number, a multitude of, it could be literally millions of records in a collection. If that is the case, the way you represent each one needs to be, addressed with some sort of like iterator or something like that. And the way you do that is with the this item object. This item will give you a way of accessing any of the columns that are associated with that particular object in the gallery. So in our case, we have the collection of cats, and our cats have full name and food, and also is selected. Is selected, which is a default column that gets added to your collection when it gets added to any gallery. So that's addressable as a Boolean, and it represents the the row that's been selected inside of your collection. So if we hit our button right here, and what it does is it does exactly what it says on the tin. It collects into call cats a record holding this data: full name, Delilah, food, chicken. And the collection inside the gallery is set to the same collection. And now there is one entry inside this gallery. In fact, let's represent that even better by adding a label. Placing it above this thing. Pardon me. And let's name our stuff, because we haven't really been naming anything. Let's call this Gallery Cats, because that's what it is. That's our gallery of cats. And this text is going to be label cats total. Actually, cats in view. In gallery is what it should be, because that's where we're going to set it to, so just to be fully exact. And we'll set this to gal cats dot, and then there is an all items count property And what that does is it will set the text of this to be the number of objects that are inside that. And we can see if we hit this again, it collects a second copy of Delilah, who has twice as much chicken now. And we can see that there are 2 objects inside of the list, and we can hit this for a while if you want. We can hit this till Delilah's done with all the chicken in the world. And we can continue to scroll through here, and they're all identical. We stopped at 75. And the thing about PowerApps is, like, even though I just stopped the app, the collection is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. And this is an interesting thing to think about. So now we can look at our variables table, or our variables pane right here, and it makes a little bit more sense. We've got global variables. Remember, we looked at this in the first video. If you skipped videos, shame on you, but you can make up for it by liking and subscribing right now. Thank you very much. So you get a sense of these are my global variables. There's context test. It's currently not set. But if I hit this button, now this repopulated, and I've got values inside of here. And it's telling me where it's defined. It's defined in demo screen dot button variables demo dot on select. Now it can show me where I'm using it, directly or indirectly. That was ambiguous. It can show me where I'm using it directly or indirectly. There, that was better. Don't worry, editors will fix that. And our direct use is on screen 2 label 2.text, and I believe if we click this, it should take us right to that control, and it does. And remember, we set that to a global context test, and there we go. Then we have context variables. On our demo screen, we can see we have context variables, our local variable, and our context test as well, and we can see where we're using them and where we're setting them in the same manner. So this can be really useful if you want to get, first of all, just looking at this gives you a sense of the importance of naming conventions, right? Because if you're looking at this list and nothing makes sense, it was your fault. But that's okay. We all screw up pretty much all the time as devs. So feel free to learn from your mistakes instead of, just beating yourself up about them. So, but very good example of how important it is to name things in a context that matters. And then this is the screen where you can go to get a handle on everything. So we can see our collection cats. Let's click view table, and we can see all of our data here. We can see food, and we can see full name. So that's the collect function. If for some reason we don't want any of these cats anymore, we want to start a new collection of cats for some reason, we can use the clear function. So we can call clear on clear cats and hit that, and now let's call this add cat. Now let's call this clear cats, button add cat, or we'll call this button collect cat, and we'll call this collect cat. I'll have to say clear cats like that. So we can add a bunch of cats and we can clear them. There's also the idea of clearing and collecting at the same time. So if you want to for example, clear the collection, I'll just we'll add it like that. And you know what, we'll just add another call that button clear collect cats, and we'll call this clear collect cats like that. And we'll make this a little bit bigger. Oh, now they're different sizes. Oh god, they're different spacings too. Baby rage. Don't worry, we'll look at all the options we have for how to align things, make beautiful pixel perfect apps at some point eventually. So now we can collect a cat, we can clear our cats, we can collect a bunch of cats now, and then we can call this clear collect function that we just learned about, and that set our collection to Garfield, lasagna, Delilah chicken. Now if we click clear collect cats again, let's see what happens. It stays at 2, and that's because this is calling clear first and then collect second. Wouldn't you believe it? Look at that. The function's so nice, they let it do 2 things twice. Or 2 things one time. Anyway, so that's the idea with that. So if we want to, for example, then collect into our collection, we can, and we still have 1 Garfield. He is unique, but now we have a whole bunch of Delilah chickens because our collect only collects 1 Delilah each time. Whereas our clear collect, if I hit right now, is collecting 1 Garfield and 1 Delilah, but clearing everything out of the collection before it does that. And then we can clear, of course, clear and call clear collect. So we've got the idea of clear and collect and clear collect. Excuse me. Let's add a little visual here. Let's add a visual cue. Let's go into the template fill of our gallery, just so there's a better indication of what is selected, and I want to set this to light blue. But what I want it to really want it to be is only for what's selected. So there's a really easy way to do that, and that's with the if conditional, which I haven't really taught you guys yet, but I guess this is a really good time to learn it. The idea is, it's really simple. If, and then we give it something that evaluates to true or false. That's it. So that, and then if it's true or false, we give it something else to do. That's it. It's really, really simple. It is incredibly important concept and invaluable knowledge to know when programming. This is the most basic form of logic that you can create in PowerApps or in programming in general. So if you understand this, you can really start to expand your knowledge in general. So right now what we want to do is we want to call if, and we want to use this item, and we want to use the isSelected property that we talked about, which evaluates to true if the object is selected. So we're going to call isSelected, and I'm going to set that to light blue. Otherwise, let's set it to white, which you do with a comma. So we have if Boolean statement evaluates to true, we give it light blue. The second comma is the else value. You can see that. True value, else value. Light blue, white. It's that simple. So now if I select Delilah, excuse me, our background color changes. Our template fill changes. So I think actually what we probably should actually let's do this. Let's do I'm trying to think about how to do I'm hitting my first conundrum where I'm in front of everyone and I'm not sure what to do next. Because I want to show you guys lookup and patch. But I haven't really given you guys a way to like an interesting scenario for how to do that. So and I kind of need to make things a little bit more complicated. I need to make the data a little bit more complicated, I guess I should say, to make that distinction. But what we're gonna do is I'm gonna select these and move these over a little bit. And I am going to insert a cancel icon. Actually, was like pretty decent sized already. Not really gonna worry about design too much here. We're not gonna get caught up in the details. But yeah, we can talk about. I guess we can talk about. Patch, I guess. Actually, if we want to do that, let's do this with the example that I've already built. Let's go back to our tree view, and let's look at our. I don't know why I'm struggling to build the thing that I built before I started the stream to demo, like on the stream. Guess I forgot that I built it. Anyway, over here we've actually got a collection and a gallery right here, and that's what I've been checking things off on here. And what I was about to build over here, I've already built. On this side, this is set to collection variables lesson, and what this is a 2-column table, and is covered and name, and you can see that some of them are set to true and some of them are set to false. And we can see that, let's look at where I've defined that collection got defined like this. I used the clear collect function. I gave it my variables lesson collection name. Then I used a function I haven't really talked about yet that I just screwed up, called add columns. This is a function I haven't covered yet, but the loose gist is you can use add columns to a table. It's that simple. So when we've got our table here, I wanted to add a unique name and then also add a is covered column to the collection on that row and have it set to false by default for everything. So that was because that was how I initially started the lesson. Now, of course, some of them have been set to true, which I'll show you how I did that. Of course, this thing disappeared. Come back. Ah! That's what I get for running things outside of play mode. There we go. Let's re-click on everything that we'd clicked on. What's a collection? Yeah, there we go. All right. So the idea is inside here, inside this little icon that I added, this gallery is set to our friend here, which is the cousin of the label, if you remember from our first lesson, the HTML text, and that gives us the ability to have bolding. And then the other thing is the outline state. And the outline state is an icon. And the icon value is an if statement, is covered. And if it's covered, then it's checked off. And if it's not covered, then it's a question mark. And when you click on this, what it does is it uses another function that I haven't showed you guys yet. And this is what we're getting to, the patch function. The patch function is a way to write into a column in a collection and change its values, or in a row and change its values based on its column name. And you also use this function to create new rows in collections as well. In the case of a data source, which we haven't quite got to yet, but we will get to eventually. But in this instance, what we're doing is we're patching our variables lesson. We're telling it that we want to patch this item, which is our record. We have to give it a source, which is our variables, a record, which is this item, which is the current item that we've iterated through, which is the one that we're currently interacting with, aka the one we've clicked on, this item. And then we're setting its is covered column to be the inverse of its current value inside the column. This is the bang operator, the not operator. I don't know what people call this thing, but it's the exclamation point. I guess it's the not operator. And this is essentially indicating that we want to get the opposite of what is inside here. And we'll talk about operators and other stuff at some point eventually in the future. And so when that happens, that code runs, and that variable inside that icon then gets reevaluated at its next interval as true or false, depending on if I click on this to toggle this back. This gets set back to question mark. So that's a very, 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 very brief informal discussion about the patch function and what it does. And it's essentially, you give it a data source or a collection. In this case, we're talking about collections. So you give it a collection, then you give it a row to patch into, and then you give it column names, and you give it new values for column names. So I guess, like, for example here, without adding a new column to this collection, which is what I was going to do, but we don't really need to do that. Let's instead patch the column that we've already created in this. So let's instead let's change this to food, our food icon. And then when you click this food icon on select, let's do a different patch. And let's patch our collection of cats. And let's patch this item again. And then we're going to look inside of a record, right? So inside of a record, let's set our food column to fed. So this will patch the food column, which is expecting a data type of text, to fed. So that's why we'll know Delilah ate her chicken, and she doesn't need to be fed anymore. So if we hit this fork and knife, if I didn't screw up, which good thing we didn't, it now changed that entry to be fed. And if you click this one, it's not working. Wait, so why is it not working? Let's clear this and collect a bunch of cats, and then try to debug our problem. All right, so we have the third one selected, and we click on this, but it's patching our first cat to be fed. Oh, I know why. I think I have an idea why. And I think it has to do with sorting. Because what it's doing is, instead of changing it and keeping it in the same position in the list, it's changing it and then moving it in the way that the list is sorted. So if we look at the collection now, it's got all the fed Delilahs. All the fed Delilahs are up at the top. But if I click on this bottom fed Delilah, and then I have to refresh this, I guess I have to close this. Then I guess that was a pretty poor example because there was only two and now there's only one left. But maybe you see what I mean. But this is an interesting segue that we can take into the potential for sorting. So let's do this. Let's copy our gallery over. But let's delete our icon because we don't need that anymore. Make that a little bit smaller. And then instead of having this be items, just call cats off like that, let's use a function called filter. And let's look inside the cats collection for only cats that are fed. So we want to look for food that is equal to fed. And those are the only ones that we want to see. So now if we clear collect cats, we've got Garfield who wants lasagna and Delilah who wants chicken. And nothing in our list that we've dedicated to fed cats because no one's been fed yet. So we want to feed Delilah first because she gets really angry if she doesn't get her chicken like right away. So we want to feed Delilah. So we made sure Delilah got fed. So Delilah's in the fed list. Goodness. Okay, now we know we're not going to feed Delilah again because she's already got her chicken no matter how much she cries. Now all we know we need to give Garfield his lasagna because he's not in the fed list. So if we give lasagna to Garfield, he gets fed. He goes in the fed list as well. Everybody is happy. But if we add some new Delilahs who need chicken and they all just want chicken, we just add a whole bunch of them, then we need to be able to manage whether or not they've gotten fed or not too. So we want to be able to do that by filtering out. Maybe we want to filter out all the cats that have already been fed out of this list. So to do that, we also want to use filter. And we'll use filter, and for the food, we want to check where it's not fed. So anyone who hasn't been fed, and then this is the not equals operator. You may be familiar with many different versions of this if you're a developer, or if you're new to this, this is how you say food is not fed, basically. So now we're only showing all the cats that haven't been fed. So if we clear collect our cats and we add a few more Delilahs who want chicken really badly, and then we add a Delilah who's been fed, she's gone from this list now, and we can keep on feeding Delilahs and make sure that all the Delilahs are fed. And now we definitely can't duplicate Delilahs anymore because this list doesn't even have the ability to feed them. And once she's been fed, she's taken out of this collection. So this is a way to use filtering to, understand the way to display information to a user based off of metadata. So we can add more cats, and we can feed them all, and they'll go back into that list. When we finally go to get to Garfield, we can feed Garfield, and Garfield will go in, and Garfield's fed. Everyone's happy. Everyone got fed. So that's a gallery. I haven't really talked about lookup yet. The idea of lookup is when you want to get exactly one record, and one record only. So in the case of this, like let's say if we add another gallery, and then we can set this item to only be explicitly one record, and to do that we can use the lookup function, and we'll call lookup with the data source and then the condition. And the condition is we don't have a lot of unique conditions here because we haven't really set that up very well. So we'll set full name is equal to Garfield because that's the only unique indicator we have right now. So this gallery will always only show Garfield, no matter what. If there's a Garfield in our collection, it will always show the status of Garfield. So let's clear everybody so there's no Garfields, and let's clear our Garfields. Or clear our cats, and collect in a new Garfield and Delilah. So now we've got our Garfield and we've got our Delilah. And we can see that Garfield wants lasagna. He hasn't been fed yet. This is just our Garfield tracker, basically. If there's a specific item in your collection that you always want to track, you need a special card for it or something like that, you can use a gallery that's set to only look up to that specific item with the lookup function explicitly and create a view into that item. quickly. So if we want to now feed Delilah, she goes into fed. Garfield hasn't updated yet at all. Garfield still needs to get fed. So now if we do this, we see Garfield's fed. And Garfield's fed in both places. So if we do the inverse of that and do Garfield first, we can see, again, the status of Garfield is always being tracked by this gallery right here. So if we clear, there's no Garfields. If we collect a bunch of Delilahs, there's no Garfields anymore. So there's no status tracking on a Garfield. But if we get a Garfield into our collection, suddenly we can get a look into our Garfield in our lookup gallery. Okay, now if we want to, we've looked at filtering, but now we want to look at sorting. And to do that, what I'm going to do is let's come over here and let's make a new gallery. And let's set its data source to our variables lesson. And let's set this to blank. And let's insert things that we need to make this pretty. You know what? I don't know why I'm doing this. Let's delete this. Control C. Control V. Oh my goodness. Everyone, make sure you take a sip of coffee. So now we have the same control on both screens. We'll talk about the best practices for how to Control C, Control V responsibly in PowerApps at some point in a future video. But understanding how to duplicate code or not duplicate code correctly, and reference code instances of code correctly is something that is conceptually possible in PowerApps, and we'll talk about that in the future. But anyway, remember we've got our global variable over here. So now we've got our variables lesson. We want to filter this, and maybe we want to only show whatever has been covered. So what we can do is we can use the function called filter. Or wait, did I cover filter? I already covered filter. We're covering sort now. Let's use sort. We want to make sure that we only we want to sort by things that we've covered. So let's say let's actually sort by is covered, and we can sort that by ascending. So now if we make this smaller, if we make this smaller, now it's sorting this by, I'm not going to change the wrap count because it'll make it more confusing on how it's actually sorting it. But it's sorting it by, you know, is covered, and it's showing the ones that are not covered at the top and the ones that are covered at the bottom based on the ascending. We can change that to descending order and it'll flip-flop. So if we uncheck what is variable, that goes down like this. We change that back to ascending. And then, so that is conditional sorting. Just a basic overview of conditional sorting within a gallery. I'll check those off again. So we talked about filtering, we talked about sorting, we talked about lookups, and finally now we need to talk about the big boy. What is the data source? And what is local versus sourced data? Okay, and we're going to take a short break and then we'll cover that when we get back. And thanks for watching, by the way. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll be right back in a minute or two. Okay, I'm back. So what is a data source? A big concept, actually. So up until now, everything that we've been talking about is local data, collections, variables, local variables, global variables, and collections are local data. In PowerApps, there's also the concept of a data source. In last video, I talked about data sources as being the secret sauce of PowerApps, and it's pardon me, it's can't be understated how important data sources are. In this particular video, we're going to cover Dataverse in particular as a data source, as is the default premium data source for PowerApps. However, there are dozens, hundreds of possible data sources potentially that you could use for PowerApps, depending on what you're trying to do. So just to just sort of start from the beginning, your data source is going to be any sort of remote data that exists outside of your app scope. So a database table, for example, or a SharePoint list, a SharePoint online list, for example, or a SQL table that exists in a local SQL server that you're running on a server, for example, or in the cloud, a SQL server that's running at Amazon, for example, or at Google, or at Microsoft, on Azure, for example. There are many places to host data and to collect data from to present within a Power App. And the one that we're going to talk about right now is called Dataverse, which is the premium data source. I call premium only because it costs more to use it, but you get, because on that premium value, which isn't really that much of a premium, you get so much more power and ability. So a data source is a cloud collection, basically, is a collection in the cloud. For all intents and purposes, that's exactly what it is, and that's kind of how you'll think of it and how you'll address it at first and how you'll think about it. And especially until you understand and start to run into and figure out what the idea of delegation is, which we will most definitely cover in upcoming videos and stuff. There is just so much to cover, and this is only my second video and we're just getting started. So, so a data source is a collection in the cloud, I think, is a nice way to think about it. And what do you do with data sources? Well, what do you do with Dataverse? Well, Dataverse is a relational database, and that's the data source. So what I did was I created a table inside our solution, but let's go ahead and show you how to do this from scratch. I went to, remember what we did in our first video, we went to our solution. I just sort of skipped this in the beginning of this video, didn't I? But we go to our PowerApps environment, make sure we're working in our correct environment if you have multiples. I went to solutions, and then I created this inside our PowerApps learning streams, and I created a table this time. I also created a new app, so we have our Stream Demo 2 app and our Stream Demo 1 app, and we can go back and look at that. So, excuse me, we have our tables area inside of our solution now, and then this is going to represent all of the tables that we've created inside of our solution that we want to export with us into another environment. Like for example, if we've developed an application in a pre-production or developer environment, and we want to then deploy this to our client's environment or to our production environments or something like that. What we would do is, have the table be a part of the solution, and then when it's exported and then imported into that other environment, it will create those tables for you as it migrates your solution into the environment. So that's why you always want to create everything you do. You want to create it inside the context of a solution, because if something, let's say one day, you've actually figured out what the heck you're doing inside PowerApps, and you've got an app that you want to sell to somebody, or you want to start working in other environments, and you want to start branching out, and you want to actually get a license, and you want to start working in different types of environments. Well, all these apps you've developed, if they're not in solutions, you've got a chore ahead of you to be able to package all those things up. You've got to figure out every single thing that you've put together and put it all in one thing. Put it all into the solution. Whereas if you didn't wait, you didn't do this on the fly, but you did this up front, you created everything within the context of the solution. Job's already done for you. So my point is, the point of this lecture is when you want to create an entity in PowerApps, do it within the context of the solution. That way you've always got a way to address it. So inside of this learning stream solution, now we've got person, stream demo 1, and stream demo 2. The person is the table that we created, and I created a table with just some basic columns, and it didn't save my view. Why you don't display my view? Oh, it did save my view. Okay, it just wasn't looking at the view, I guess. I don't know. Not an expert on Dataverse, especially in views and things like that, but and we'll get there. There's a couple interesting things about this table. First of all, I asked ChatGPT to give me just 10 random names, so that's how I got these names, by the way. So if your name's on here, I forgive you. Forgive me, I should say. The second thing is there are two. So we'll look at the. Let's go back to this view. I do not want to. I want to look at the column view like this. We added a few custom columns. The first one is first name. So it's single line of text. That's just their first name. The second one is last name, which is also just single line of text. Then I added two calculated columns. And a calculated column is just a regular column that then gets its value calculated at runtime, basically. At pop-up blocked. I don't want my pop-ups locked. I actually wonder if what's it called? This isn't gonna display in OBS, is it? On Memento. There we go. So, with calculated columns are a special type of column in Dataverse and in some other types of databases as well. and in that they can be set to a formula, and then that formula will be calculated when other columns are changed in that row. So for example, here I have created a full name calculated column. Instead of typing out their full name and setting that as a display, instead of having to type out their full name and having that as a column that we have to enter in as data, or instead of having to always concatenate first and last name in the app, what I've done is I've created a calculated column that pre-concatenates these values together into a column that we can then address as full name. And you can do that really simply. And I've also taken the same, let's close that, and I hope the other one pops up because I've taken that same principle and applied it here with a column that I've called primary email. And I'll hit edit and I'll hope it pops up. It didn't. It didn't. That's not what I wanted to do at all. Oh my god, it's a disaster. Don't worry, we're fixing it. Nailed it. First try. Anyway, so what I did was I wanted an email column for my data source as well, because I wanted that to just have a little bit of extra stuff to display in our gallery. So I used a calculated column to just concat their first and last name and then give them a fake email address. And so those are now columns that are in our data source. We'll close that. And we'll close that. So now we have this person table. And I'll show you. Let's add another column to this. You can go up to new, and we'll talk about relationships at some point in the future. But we'll add a column here, and we'll call this date of birth or something like that. We'll call this date of birth. And we'll give this a date and time. We'll just give this date only. That's all we care about. And this is where you choose the behavior, simple, calculated, or roll up. This is going to be a simple behavior. We're going to set this as optional. Not everyone is. You can have columns be set to optional, required, or recommended. And we can get into what recommended really means is it comes into play when you're creating model-driven apps, essentially, which was something that we're not really covering in the scope here, but required and optional are two things that are important in Canvas apps, which and I wonder if you can actually address the required. You probably can with data source info. So maybe we'll talk about that in a future. So maybe you can use business recommended in Canvas apps. You just have to be a little bit more suave about it. But anyway, this is how you enforce validation or requirements on one level of that on your column. And then we can set this to be searchable or not, basically, in model-driven apps and stuff like that. So we'll just, whatever it's checked as default, we'll just leave it checked. So now we've got errors. Awesome. We want to see their full name, their date of birth, their primary email. There we go. So now we can see Aisha, Andre, Emily, etc. Now if we want to set their date of birth, this interface looks not super useful. So maybe this should be another lesson in patching, I guess. I don't know. Let's go back to PowerApps. Actually, let's do the final important step here. Let's now publish our table, which is taking the changes that we just made to our table and writing all those configurations now into the environment. So that PowerApps will have access to that. So now, when we come in here, we want to add data. We're going to add our people table. That we had from Dataverse. And that's set to Dataverse current environment. And now we can click Edit Data, and we can look at what's in that. And then this is giving us that view. This should be the view that we set, since we added date of birth to that basic view. So now we can close that. So now we have our view, we have our data imported into PowerApps. Let's make a new screen. Make a new blank screen. Let's insert a gallery. And now let's set this data source to be our people data source. And we can immediately see that we have a whole bunch of records in here. And it's showing me a bunch of random stuff. Remember, we can come in and we can set the layout, for example. With people, so we'll add a couple text values like that. So the first value in here is, we'll set to full name. And then this value over here, we'll look at one day we're gonna have to like master views and stuff. We'll look at their primary email. And there we'll look at their date of birth. And their date of birth for everyone should be empty, unfortunately. But we can fix that. Let's move that over a little bit. Actually, let's do this the other way around. We'll do this like that. We're gonna do this kind of messy, but it's whatever. Let's add a date picker. And oh, date picker has it on change. Awesome. So let's do this. Let's move this date picker over here. And we'll have that default date set to today, and we'll have this on change function fire. And when it changes, we'll use our new powers of the patch function that we just learned to set their date of birth based on whatever is in this magical date picker that the user has just selected from. So we are going to patch right into our people data source right now. So we'll patch and we'll patch people. We're also going to patch this item, but I'm not sure if that's going to work in a data source or not. We'll have to see. And then we'll look in to date of birth. And we'll call self.selectedDate. And we'll close that. And yeah, looks like all is good. No errors. So let's go ahead and hit play. And then when we hit OK, nothing's going to happen because the date hasn't changed. But if we set this to tomorrow, then what that's going to do is it's going to patch into our data source Emily Johnson's birthday, and it's set to August 7th, which is tomorrow. So maybe we can set Emily's birthday to some random July 4th, 1974. And we can set Mark Thompson's birthday to April 8th, 1970. And what we can even do now is we can set the visibility of this. We can call a function called isBlank to check whether or not a column has data inside of it or is set to null. There is a concept of a nullable column where you have either data in it or you don't. Sometimes things are required, sometimes you want data in them, and sometimes you want the concept of no data inside of it. And that's a nullable column. In this case, birthday was set to non-required. It's technically a nullable column and has lots of nulled values inside of it. So we can use the isBlank on this item dot date of birth. There we go. And since that is automatic, that's returning a true or false value, this visible formula is evaluating into a true or false value. So anyone that has a date of birth, this is just going to disappear. So as I set in everyone's date of birth, if I set Aisha's, then that disappears. So now I don't need to worry about that anymore. And we can look into our Dataverse, and we can not see their date of birth over here for some reason. But there we go. Now we can refresh and we can see date of birth is being entered. So even if we skip people, we can see. And remember, we can use filtering on this as well. We can filter with data sources as well, filter with people, and we can use the same type of concepts with filtering. So we can filter by not is blank date of birth. And now we're only going to get people that have a date of birth. But maybe we only want to show people that don't have date of birth because currently we're we're cleansing our data right now. We're working on fixing our data. So we only want to worry about people that don't have their date of birth set, and we're going to set it for them. Yellow. There we go. Oh, there was no date selected. You hate to see it. Okay, so now everyone has a date of birth set. So we no longer need to filter by that anymore. So we can just filter by people again. And in fact, we can just remove our date picker, but we don't want to do that because maybe someone new will get added to our system one day and they won't get their date of birth recorded correctly. So we'll have to come in and set their date of birth correctly in our obscure app that we made for setting people's birth dates. But essentially, that's the difference between local and cloud data, is that, you know, we've got this people collection, quote unquote, but it exists in Dataverse, not in our app. And, you know, if we hit refresh, then we'll see all of our data bursts are recorded, and these people, you know, Mark, Aisha, Jake, Sophia, these people exist in Dataverse forever, quote unquote, until, you know, until you remove them or delete them, or they become not customers of yours, or whatever reasons you have for removing them from your database. And then what Dataverse can also give you is the concept of status for people. So you can have people become inactive in your organization over time, or you can have contacts become inactive and then set them to active again. And you can track their status. You can also even track status reasons as well. And all those come out of the box in columns inside of Dataverse or Dataverse tables. So really lots of pluses for Dataverse. So one thing that we can do is, now that we have multiple columns here, one thing that I kind of want to just do is, let's move this over and dupe this, because we also have, and dupe this again, because we have the idea of like their first name, right? So we have Emily's first name, and then their last name. So we have last name, we can match that up like that. And then we have, this is their full name. So if we really, what we want to do is we want to, you know, we can delete that. We can actually really just, I can try to show you this without using string concatenation, but there's really no reason to skip this. So you can use the ampersand to join strings together. So like in this instance, we can say join these two, this item dot, like that, and we can you know, have their name be last name comma first name. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to overwrite this. Like that. And we'll delete that. And what we can do now is we can sort this in a variety of ways, right? So we can sort this people and by their last name. I'm gonna use I use the quotes right there. So now we've got everyone sorted by their last name. So Layla Ali shows up as first, even though her first name starts with an L, her last name starts with an A, and we're sorting by last name, then we're still able to use the display name to display their name correctly, and that information is coming from Dataverse instead of having to be calculated. So make that a little bit bigger. And then of course, you know, you can also filter this even further. So like, let's say, for example, I guess one thing that we haven't really talked about is the idea of cascading the idea of cascading tables together with tables. So I think I just completely butchered the way to describe that correctly with English. But essentially, the sort function, like people is a table, right? And sort returns a table. And the filter function returns a table too. So like we can create a situation where we can filter on people and then sort the results of the filter. So like, let's say we want to filter everyone whose date of birth is greater than or equal to date value. I think this is how you do it. Everyone that's born after 1990, basically. And that looks like we've sorted everyone that was born after 1990 by last name, and that looks like exactly what we're trying to do. And let's flippy floppy this to see if we get the other side of the table, and we do. We get everyone now. It looks like I completely like segregated everyone into like the 70s and the 90s, so or the 2000s kind of, just totally randomly by accident, I swear. Yeah, there's like everyone's in the mid 2000s or in the 70s. Funny, but you can see how we're using our filter, and then inside we're using our filter inside of our sort. So first we're getting everyone who was born after this date value of 1990, January 1st, 1990. And we're returning a table of that. And we can see that here. Then we're sorting it. And we're sorting it based on last name, which we can see right here. So now we've got the same table, but sorted by last name. And that's it. This is the secret sauce and the magic of Dataverse. At least one slice of it. We're slicing into it. We're slicing into the sauce. But this is a big part of it. Understanding this concept of the difference between a collection and a data source, how to operate between the two of them, and the different ways to operate inside of them with patch, and with sorting, and with filtering, and with functions like that we briefly touched on, like add columns, functions like group by, functions like search. Could we perhaps add a search into this as well to increase the searching into our... I think we can, and I think we should, and I think that will probably be the last part of this stream today. But if we want to add a search, right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just call this search box. And I'm just going to call this gal people. So we've got our search box and we've got our gal people, and I'm going to set my default to that, and I'm going to set this to last name. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove all this, and we're just going to sort people. We're going to get everyone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a new function. Instead of filtering, I'm going to, we're going to do this inside, and we're going to sort the results. So we're going to call search on people. And the first argument into search is the search text that you want to search. So our text is going to be text search box dot text, and the column name has to be in double quotes, and the column name that we want to search into, let's search into a last name. Or is it called new last name? It is. And we can go into why it's called new last name in a future video, but there are different scopes of column names as well and how they're addressed in terms of PowerApps and your environment level. I guess is one way of putting it. Environments have a prefix that gets assigned, and that prefix gets assigned to your columns, your custom columns inside of custom tables, or inside of, into columns that you add into any table, I should say, get your prefix. And the reason for that is to differentiate between the idea of multiple people writing into the same solution or writing into the same environment in different solutions into the same tables. So like there could be another person in my organization who is developing an application using the people table in a different environment, I guess. And then when they were in my environment, but in a different solution, and then when they deploy to our prod environment, their columns in their people table have a different prefix than my columns in the same people table. I think I may have confused myself even more when I explained it, but I think I kind of explained it correctly. It's just a confusing concept to begin with. But anyway, that's why you have to address this with a new _ last name. And it's very important that this is correct, because if this column isn't correct, as you can see, we get an error here. So you're going to want to make sure that that's correct. So now we can search into our last name. So any characters we type in here, so if I type, we can scroll down, anything we can start typing in will immediately start surfacing our data. And all we're searching into is the last name. But I guess we could search into their full name, right? There's no reason why we can't. Into their new full name. So now we can look at anyone who has an L in their name, basically. Layla, Emily, Aisha, and Andre Williams. So if we want to search for Williams, Andre Williams will come up. If you had an organization with, 500 people, you might have, several people that get surfaced with a search like that, where we only have 10 people in our database right now. But the point of this was to show you how absolutely brain dead, quick, and simple it was to just add searching into our surface search into our data. And I think that's pretty much going to conclude the second video here. We just hit our 2-hour runtime, which is about the same duration of the first video. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in and checking out this video, and make sure you give it a thumbs up, like and subscribe, whatever the heck it's called, I don't know. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, thanks for checking out the content. I hope you learned something, and I will be back in a future video to touch on more advanced concepts in PowerApps. Now that we know what controls are, we know what variables are, we know what data sources are, we know what collections are, we're ready to hit the ground running and actually make an app and make it do something, not just look at things. So that's what we're going to do next time, and I look forward to seeing you guys then. So take care, everybody.